Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
I'm concerned.
Oh?
Well, the show rundown today says I'm supposed to be concerned, so I'm concerned.
Oh,
how are you?
Yes, I am also concerned. I didn't even realize I was, but then you reminded me, yes, I am concerned. And so this episode is the follow-up to our Thursday episode, which was a rundown position by position, our concerns at each position on offense. So today we move to the defensive side of the ball. And when you are replacing the number of starters that the Buckeyes are replacing from arguably the nation's best defense, there are going to be some concerns. So Tom, I thought we'll run, we're not just going to say, what's the biggest concern on the defensive line? No, we're going defensive ends and defensive tackles. All right. Is that all right with you? Did I screw everything up for you?
Well, I tried to list a couple things for each position just in case you stole my answer. So that'll work out just fine.
All right. Well, you know what? Let's start at defensive tackle. What do you got there? And then I'll follow you.
Well, at defensive tackle, I don't think people really appreciate how good Devon Hamilton was last year, and he's not there anymore. He was an absolute force on the inside of that line, and they've got good depth at that, at both of those interior spots. But you're losing Devon Hamilton, you're losing Robert Landers. I mean, you've got those are not guys that just come off an assembly line. It sometimes seems like it with the way Larry Johnson produces defensive tackles, but you've got to have someone step up and be that kind of a force inside. Because, there was all sorts of talk last year about Chase Young for very good and very obvious reasons, but that, I think, sort of overshadowed how good Devon Hamilton was inside, and they need someone to be that good this year.
You're right. They usually want their interior pass rush and their disruption coming from the 3 technique, but it was Hamilton who was third on the team with 10.5 tackles for loss. He was outstanding. One of the most disruptive nose tackles Ohio State has had. And I would say in terms of getting into the backfield in the last 20 years, he's right up there. And so that's going to be almost impossible to replace, even though, Tom, both you and I have really high expectations for Tommy Togiai. But you're asking anybody, any nose tackle, a lot to do what Devon Hamilton did. I'll go away from that, and I think productive depth is a concern when you lose Hamilton, Landers, Ja'Shawn Cornell, and you're replacing them with guys who were there last year, but you're still waiting on some of these guys to blossom. And Teron Vincent missed last year as a sophomore, and I think we all expect him to do well at the 3 tech. Him and Haskell Garrett, what kind of pass rush can they provide? Cornell was into the backfield a little bit at times last year. Can they do better than that? And if they can, Ja'Shawn Cornell, 6.5 tackles for loss last year and 4 sacks. I would think Vincent could handle that, and Vincent and Haskell Garrett could maybe cover up some of that loss of Hamilton in terms of the numbers. But the depth is where, who is behind Tommy Togiai? You've got Tron Cage, you've got Antoine Jackson. There's guys who haven't necessarily produced yet, and we're still waiting. But of course, when you're talking about as deep as the Buckeyes have been on the defensive line, you can understand why some of these guys are still waiting. But I think for me, it's depth. They're not going to be as deep as they have been. And so now if the guys in the rotation, second team guys aren't producing, now you're not as good. So that's kind of a concern for me.
Yeah, and I think that's a very legitimate concern because, you mentioned Tommy Togiai, for example. I think both of us are pretty high on him and are expecting some pretty big things from him this year. But last year, Tommy Togiai was the third guy at the nose. Now he's the first guy, and is the third guy in that defensive nose tackle rotation this year going to be as good as Tommy Togiai was last year? I don't know. Maybe. We'll have to see. But yeah, there's definitely some uncertainty there, and that's something that can be a big deal just during the course of a game, as, if you were able to really rotate guys through, you end up wearing the other team out just over the course of the game. But also, you have one injury, or, if someone comes down with COVID this year and has to miss a couple weeks, like there's all sorts of additional questions this year that depth is going to be extremely, extremely important. And yeah, that's definitely a question on the inside of the defensive line this year.
Going over to defensive end, I will go first here. And for me, it's health. I think the talent is there, but of all of the guys, it's a deep group. There's numbers there for sure. But last year, I think only Chase Young, Javonte Jean-Baptiste, I'll go French for you, Tom. Javonte Jean-Baptiste and Zach Harrison. Those are the only three guys to play every game. Tyreek Smith and Tyler Friday both missed a few games with injury. We know Jonathan Cooper was out for most of the year and got that red shirt. And, the assumption and the belief is that everybody is healthy, but will they stay healthy? And that's my biggest concern for the group of defensive ends. And it should be very good. These are all blue chip guys. Zach Harrison is on pace to, just based on his freshman production, he was very similar to Chase Young's freshman production, very similar to Nick Bosa's freshman production. So based on his recruiting rankings, his physical prowess, his production, it's easy to project him in a similar manner and assume he's going to be very good, possible all Big Ten this year, if not more. Tyreek Smith has been so close at times, and when he's been healthy, he's been disruptive, but he's not been healthy. He is now, so that is going to be big, but can he stay that way? And same with Tyler Friday. And Tom, I think everybody wants to see Jonathan Cooper, nobody more so than himself wants to see him have his best year and finally realize all of the potential. This is his fifth year now, which seems crazy because we're just following his recruiting not so long ago, it seems like, and he was tearing through the summer camps and his recruiting rankings were rising by the month, and then he gets here and, when you're behind Nick Bosa and Tyquan Lewis and Sam Hubbard and Jalen Holmes, it's understandable. But that's not been the case for the last few years, and so I think everybody wants to see him produce like his expectations warrant. So that's me. The health is my biggest concern, but the good news is there's a number of bodies to overcome those health concerns just as they did last year, but Chase Young kind of helps that.
Oh, you think so? Is that your professional opinion? Did you have to grind a lot of film to reach that conclusion?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the thing that I think is the kind of looming question this year is how will all the other defensive ends produce when Chase Young isn't out there to occupy two blockers or three blockers or force the other team to scheme specifically around where he is? He was such an impact on the field. Even when he didn't make a play, he was making an impact on almost every play. Even if he didn't have a tackle, if he didn't have a sack on a play, it didn't matter. A lot of times, just his mere presence was enough to take things away from the opponent. This year, you don't have that, and maybe Zach Harrison can get there at some point. I don't know if the start of his sophomore year it's realistic to expect that. Maybe this is the year Jonathan Cooper, finally fulfills all that potential. But if not, it puts a little more pressure on everybody. And if you don't have Devon Hamilton on the inside, potentially occupying a couple guys, and you don't have Chase Young on the outside, potentially occupying a couple guys, that gives opposing teams a little bit more flexibility in terms of what they can do. This is not a deal breaker for the season by any means. Like there's plenty of talent in that room to be able to do that, to be able to be something close to that level of player, to step up and sort of fill that hole that Chase Young leaves. But you haven't seen it yet. You haven't seen it from these guys. It could happen, but someone has to actually step up and do that and be that kind of impact player. And I don't know what a reasonable expectation for Zach Harrison is for this year. I mean, you mentioned that his stats were almost identical to Chase Young's as a freshman. Chase Young put up okay numbers as a sophomore, but he had 2 bum ankles for a decent chunk of that season. So,
true.
I think you can look at Chase Young's sophomore stats, and I think that's a realistic floor for Zach Harrison. That's a realistic expectation that he could get to that's kind of point. Maybe end up with even better numbers than that, but someone has to step up and be that kind of impact player. In the same way that Chase Young had to step up and be that kind of impact player when Nick Bosa went down early in that 2018 season and didn't come back.
The bowl game after Chase Young's freshman season, he said next year he was shooting for 10.5 sacks, which is exactly where he ended up. So even he was like selling himself short because, of course, you mentioned the ankles. He probably should have had like 14 or something, or maybe he was just taking it easy. I don't know. But yeah, we'll have to ask Zach Harrison when we talk to him this spring if he has any number. And it's rare when players actually give you a number. They'll either say, no, I don't have any, or I have a number in mind, but I'm not going to give it to you. But Chase Young's one of those guys like, yeah, I want, I'm thinking 10.5 next year. And then he went out and did it. He probably should have said like 18 or something. And then maybe the Buckeyes would have won a national title.
If he hadn't stopped trying as soon as he got to his 10.5, I mean, come on.
Well, I'm done.
If I told you Jonathan Cooper gets 10.5 sacks this season, what does that do to your impression of what this team could be this fall?
Oh, I mean, you said that and my eyes lit up because those are unexpected numbers. And so then that makes everybody else better. It makes him an elite player. So yeah, that would, you put him in what we would assume Zach Harrison. If you've got Mike Vrabel and Matt Finkus on the edges and double-digit sacks, I mean, that makes everybody downfield better. The corners will be elite. That might solve some of the safety concerns, if there are any. We'll get to that later. But yeah, I mean, if it's just more than one guy and it's not just one guy chasing the quarterback into the other 3 guys on the defensive line, but if it's a Vrabel Finkus type of thing, now you've got something. And we saw that with Bosa or Nick Bosa and Sam Hubbard and Taekwon Lewis and those guys, and Taekwon Lewis and Joey Bosa. So there's been some of that before, but where it's like, which one of these guys is the best defensive end in the Big Ten? And then, well, let's just figure it out by meeting at the quarterback, and whoever gets there first gets that title. That would be a positive, a spin, a positive, result from, I don't think people are expecting 10.5 sacks. I would put, if I went over under on like 5.5, maybe 6.5, where are you going for Jonathan Cooper?
I'd say over 6.5. I think. I mean, that's about where he's ended up, right? In the last couple of years. I don't have his stats in front of me, but I feel like he ended up in that kind of like 5-ish range a couple of years ago, right?
Yeah.
So yeah. Now. I mean, I think
2.5 in 2018, and
2.5
then
in 2018? Okay.
2 in 2017. So,
okay. Yeah. I mean, he's probably
one last year, but it was against Michigan.
Okay. Then I was thinking about his career number and not an individual season number. Yeah. I mean, I think he's in, somewhere in that range. And it's going to depend a little bit on how they handle the rotation and all of that. And if everybody's healthy and everybody's staying fresh, then he might not be getting as many snaps. But, I think that's a reasonable expectation. 6-ish. If it's significantly more than that, yeah, I mean, that I think tells me that something pretty significant is happening with this team this fall. But yeah, I mean, if he puts together just like a 6-sack season, that's I think a good solid senior year for him.
Yeah, and there's going to be so much rotation that sometimes if their stats relative to another team's defensive ends may not actually line up because Ohio State is playing more defensive ends than anybody else, and that's when it gets a little crazy when you see Chase Young doing what he's doing and he's not out there for every snap. let's go to linebackers, Tom, and I'll give you the first go. And this could be any of them, whomever, the position as a whole. What is the biggest concern for the Ohio State linebackers in your mind?
I mean, to me, it's who fills the Malik Harrison spot. I mean, he was so good at will the last couple of years. He is a lot like Devon Hamilton, where I think people didn't really appreciate how good he was when he was on the field. But he was just so consistently good for this team the last couple of years. Even when a lot of other stuff was on fire in 2018, Malik Harrison was generally not one of the issues. So I think he was a little bit underappreciated while he was on the team. And, it sounds like the last time we talked to people, it sounded like they were looking at moving Pete Werner over to the will spot. And if so, then that's probably, that probably puts them in a pretty good spot. And I feel pretty confident about him. And then that opens up Sam. And who do they go with there? Because they have so much talent in that room. And a lot of those guys are like in their third season and haven't gotten to play yet. And at some points, one of them is going to step up, but you don't know exactly who it's going to be. So there's just a little bit of uncertainty where they have so many great pieces there, and it's just a matter of mixing and matching and finding the right group to the right group. Because their goal is going to be the three best guys, and then find spots for them basically. So just figuring out who those guys are going to be. But I think there will at some point be a game this year that people think, oh, I wish Malik Harrison was still here, because he was just so consistently just a solid performer for them for a couple of years now.
I'm gonna go with who replaces Pete Werner, because I do expect if they follow through with what they did in the spring, then that would put Pete Werner at the will. And so then my biggest concern for the linebackers becomes who replaces Pete Werner in terms of everything that Pete Werner did last year, which playing out in space, rotating back to safety. Remember, this was supposed to be a split role with the Sam and the Bullet, two different players. And then basically that just became Pete Werner, and he was the Bullet, he was the Sam, whatever you want to call it. And so if he is over at the will, where I expect he would be pretty darn good, then who do they have? Can they replace him with one guy? Like, I believe it would be Kayvon Pope at the Sam right now. He was the backup last year, with Taraja Mitchell being the backup at the will, Dallas Gant being at the Mike. Of course, all these guys are they can move around and play different positions. Maybe not necessarily Mitchell, who's isn't more of an inside backer at will or Mike. But if obviously Baron Browning would be there, and he has moved somewhere outside, as he said in the spring. I would assume that would be the Sam, but then we also saw him doing some pass rushing, and that was what he was talking about. So I don't know, Tom, if it would be like Werner at the will and then Baron Browning at the Sam for the first two downs, and then maybe does he go to the edge and Kayvon Pope come in, or do they not bring another linebacker in at that point and do something else? So there's going to be, with these three juniors, and there's Justin Hilliard as well. So he's in there somewhere. There's maybe the biggest concern, Tom, is what happens if they forget like three of these guys exist? Like, oh, we left Justin Hilliard at home. Shoot, somebody get him on a plane to Oregon. It's like Home Alone, Justin!
I hope burglars don't try and break into his house. Hijinks will ensue.
It's just a lot of guys.
It is a lot of guys, and that's what I was saying. It's just they have so many pieces there, but I wonder if they have a sense for what they're going to do, or if it's still like they were really hoping to sort of sort this out during spring ball and have a better idea now, and because they didn't really get a spring ball, they really still don't know. And that's one of those things you're never going to get an answer, a straightforward answer from coaches. But yeah, I feel like there's just so many different ways they could align them. And, like you said, it could depend on down and distance in a lot of cases. And I don't know if they have a great sense for how everything fits together right now. And that's something you would, I think, generally want to have a pretty good idea for going into fall camp. But without spring ball, there's gonna be a lot of probably a lot of shuffling and a lot of jobs up in the air to some degree during the fall. And then you have to if you're not just consistently working at Sam, for example, and maybe we'll try moving you to Will. Or maybe we're gonna if we decide we have to have Pete Werner at Sam, we'll have to have someone else play Will. If you're moving guys around, you can't focus as much on learning, exactly the roles and responsibilities of that one position. So yeah, there's just that uncertainty is just that's a little bit of a concern. But this is a little bit like we had when we had the offensive line conversation the other day. It's like. Yeah, or the wide receiver conversation too. Like, yeah, there's some uncertainty, but there's enough talent there that they'll figure it out. It's just you just don't like that level of uncertainty, I think, going into fall camp.
Like, will the bullet be a safety, or who would that guy be if there isn't if there isn't a linebacker who can do it all? But I think at this point last year, they weren't aware that Pete Werner could do everything that they wanted him to do, because if you remember back in spring when we got to see it and it wasn't a lot, we didn't really see the whole bullet thing. It was more of a safety. Sometime would be a little bit of a linebacker, but we didn't actually necessarily see it like we saw it throughout the season. And, Brendan White's playing time went down considerably and then eventually transferred. So I'm not sure they knew what they had and what Pete Werner could do until they saw it in fall camp and then more into the season. So this might be, again, a process this year where they learn more and more, and not having spring obviously kills that, which they were more well equipped this past spring to start putting stuff in because of all of the experience. And I believe Al Washington said they did get some stuff in because of the experience and guys were able to figure it out, but it would have been obviously much better if, with so much experience, that they could have started trying more things and seeing who can do what, and you're not necessarily learning the whys and the hows of the position because you did that last year. Now let's go see if we can just get it done on the field. So this might be a thing that continues from August when camp starts until September, and even through the first few games, figuring out exactly what they want to do. And then with so many guys, sound like you said, you also match it to who you're playing, and sometimes the bullet maybe more safety than linebacker, and sometimes if like you got a Wisconsin or something or an Iowa, you don't necessarily need two safeties out there. You need 3 or 4 linebackers and 6 or 7 defensive linemen.
Yeah, and I think they will have this stuff figured out at some point, but it's not going to be figured out probably as quickly as it would have in a normal year. And if that spills into the season, you're playing Oregon pretty early this year, so you got to get a lot of this stuff sort of sorted out pretty quickly.
So that moves us to the corners, and Tom, I'll let you decide. Should we include the slot corner here or with the safeties? I mean, it's called a slot corner, but is it a corner or is it a safety, Tom? That's up to you.
I think we can fold it in with the corners. Let's keep it linguistically consistent.
Good. That's what I did. And my concern, Tom, is who's going to play the slot corner this year? I'm sure you have other concerns that you can go on about for minutes and minutes. But for me, it's the slot corner thing. And with Shaun Wade moving to the outside, this was my most, the most frustrating thing about the whole COVID-19 pandemic was not being able to figure this out. As it relates to spring football and me and my viewing of spring football. Just, we got to see, like, I saw Bryson Shaw. I think we saw, Marcus Hooker. Pretty sure saw Legend Cavazos in that role. But, it would have been nice to see, like, okay, who is always with the ones? And I don't think that ever really happened. And so, is that Cameron Brown? Is it Sevyn Banks? Is it, Marcus Hooker? Is it who is it? And if they're not, I don't want to say not as good as Shaun Wade because they likely won't be, but we saw what happened last year when Shaun Wade was not in the slot, and it took a little while for them to fix things, and it wasn't a great fix, but when he was not in there, like immediately it was noticeably worse defense. And so you've got to have somebody of elite talent there. And when Kerry Combs said this spring that he still wants to rotate 3 corners, I'm still wondering, does that mean just the 3 on the outside and who those 3 would be? Or does he mean rotating the 3 through the outside and the slot? And if you're doing that, that doesn't really make any sense, because you're not giving anybody a break and you're forcing them to do stuff that they don't necessarily want, like why have them go back and forth between positions? So I don't think that's what he would do. So if he's going to rotate those 3, is Cameron Brown or Seven Banks on the inside? And are they trying to bring in Tyreek Johnson or Marcus Williamson or a freshman? There's just the questions that didn't get answered at corner, plus bringing in a new coach and Kerry Combs. That's all a concern, but specifically at slot corner for me.
Well, and you kind of addressed sort of indirectly what my big concern is, which is the depth, which, Shaun Wade is Shaun Wade, and Shaun Wade is going to be great this year, and I don't think anyone has a concern about him. And, between Cameron Brown and Seven Banks, like, one of them will be fine on the other side. They'll be okay. But you get to question marks a little sooner than you would have during a normal, during one of the more recent Ohio State years. You get to like so like if someone gets hurt, then what kind of questions pretty quickly, because you got to remember they had Jordan Battle committed a couple of years ago, and he flipped to Alabama very, very late, and they couldn't replace him. So you lost a corner there. They had Clark Phillips committed last year. He flipped to Utah very late in the cycle. Amir Reep got kicked off the team this spring. Like there's a lot of kind of guys who should be there providing depth, providing, if you're gonna say like there's a 50-50 chance any of these guys is gonna turn into like a second team all Big Ten caliber player. Like you've removed several people from that, several of those coin flips. You don't have the option of flipping those coins anymore. So that has to be a little bit of a concern, because you get down to the Ryan Watts and Legend Cavazos on the depth chart a little earlier than you would want to for true freshmen who didn't get a chance to go through spring ball this year. And you saw guys get hurt last year. You saw guys get kicked out of games for targeting last year. Like that happens, and when it does, you've got to have someone else who can step up and be a reasonable replacement. Because as soon as Shaun Wade went out of that Fiesta Bowl last year, Amir Reep came in and Clemson went right after him and scored a touchdown. I mean, was it 2 plays? I mean, it was like they found him and they went after him. And you have to have someone who is, no one is going to be as good as Shaun Wade this year. But if you have someone who is 85% as good as Shaun Wade, that's probably fine. You can't have that much of a drop off. And I think there's got to be a little bit of a concern with, if a guy gets hurt, if a guy gets kicked out of a game for targeting, who else is on the field, and where else that how deep they really trust the guys on the depth chart.
And you look at how much Seven Banks and Cameron Brown played last year. Are they going to get that from Tyreek Johnson or Marcus Williamson or Legend Cavazos or Ryan Watts? And if they get that from the freshmen instead of the veterans, is that a great sign? Is that it may be a great sign based on, the freshmen being that good. But I don't know that those guys can be relied upon as much as Banks and Brown were last year. And if the injuries happen, you mentioned that the 50-50 all Big Ten. Like, you look at the corners, and yeah, I could say that about Shaun Wade. I think you could say the same thing about Cameron Brown and Seven Banks, but you can't say that about anybody else at corner. And I don't know, maybe you probably have to go back, and maybe it's not that rare when you can only say that about 3 Buckeye cornerbacks on a team. But just the lack of production and experience out of past those 3. I mean, Marcus Williamson's been around forever and has played some, but injuries have kept him off the field. Tyreek Johnson has, hasn't been on the field at all. There was some good words said about him from Kerry Combs, this spring. But really, just the unknowns at that position is a concern. And I have full faith that Cameron Brown and Sevyn Banks are going to be good just because they've played enough. And usually if you play as much as they did, then you produce the next year. So those guys, the depth is definitely a concern. But if they don't find somebody to fill that slot, it's all just the same mud of concern there because there's not enough guys to fill the spots that they need, and now you've got to deal with it. Tom, let's move to safety, where I will give you the first concern pick.
Is Josh Proctor going to be as reliable as Jordan Fuller and therefore allow them to play the one high is my question.
Yes.
When you say, does that mean you disagree?
No, that is the biggest question.
Yeah, I was gonna say that seemed like pretty obvious to me as the big concern. Jordan Fuller is a lot like Malik Harrison to me, where I don't think people truly appreciated how good he was because it was the absence of big plays, and that was something that last year Jeff Hafley preached over and over was don't give up big plays, don't give up explosive plays. And Jordan Fuller was a huge part of that. And now he's gone. Josh Proctor, you've seen flashes from him. He had, I think the first game he played, or was it the first game last season? He had an interception. He's a big hitter. He certainly has the pedigree. The coaching staff loves him. But, Clemson hit some big plays in that Fiesta Bowl. And, if you're giving up big plays, that might force them to get out of that one high look that they really like, and that changes the whole defense if you have to make that change.
Yeah, for me that's the biggest concern. Depth, I think, is also an issue there. It would be maybe the number 2 or number 3 concern is who is the other guy? Is it Marcus Hooker? I think showed some stuff this spring. We haven't seen Ronnie Hickman yet, but he's finally healthy. Bryson Shaw sat last year. He was getting on the field. Then you bring in some prospects as well. So it's a little deeper than it has been, but really the production isn't there. But those when your backups are redshirt freshmen and things like that, there won't be any production. But yeah, it's the Josh Proctor, can he tackle? Are you when you're in the last line of defense, as I always say, like we've talked about it since Jordan Fuller left, that you got to make those plays and you got to make the tackles. And we saw Isaiah Pryor not do those things early on in 2018. I don't know. The years get mixed up. But when you miss a guy, you take a bad angle or you get juked. And that was something that Jordan Fuller really almost never did. And so he was able to allow this defense to play the way it did. And it's amazing when it all hinges like on the slot corner and the free safety. You've got to have talent there. And if you don't, then you've got to do something else or you are going to give up some big plays. So we'll see how it goes. As Tom said, there's plenty of talent on hand, at linebacker, defensive end, corners and the safety, maybe not as much, but there is still talent there. And, you build your defense, you play the system to the strengths of your players. And if that's not going to be their strength, the one high or whatever, they're not going to force it, just like they didn't force Dwayne Haskins to run the ball 15 times a day, like a game like JT Barrett. And so you do what you can with what you have, and that's how you're going to get the best out of them. I still think they're going to be able to do that, but it all comes down, Tom, to tackling and being that last line of defense for Josh Proctor.
Right. None of these issues are things that you look and you go, well, there's no answer to that on this roster. Like there are answers to all of these concerns, answers to all of these questions. This is not like last year when during the summertime, I remember we had a show last year where we were talking about Michigan, and it's like, yeah, but they don't have defensive tackles. That's not something you can just fix with like, and this guy's just, this guy is taking a step forward in camp and is now doing a better job. It's like, no, you don't have defensive tackles. Like that is not a fixable issue.
But Tom, it was fixed.
Michigan's issue was fixed last year?
Yes, they put fullback Ben Mason at nose tackle. So I think that was pretty fixed.
Just changing the listing on the roster doesn't actually fix the issue, FYI. Just so you know.
So if I put a different address on my mailbox, that doesn't mean I moved?
No, I don't think that's exactly how it works. But yeah, I'm not a realtor, so I'm not 100% sure.
All right, I think that'll do it for this show. We want to thank you all for listening, as always. Make sure to check out everything at buckeyescoop.com. Sign up, grab yourself a membership. I promise you it is worth it. There's all kinds of stuff. We finally launched on Thursday, and the response has been great. The message board is booming, and it's almost a little hard to keep up with everything right now. Tom, the YouTubes, the podcast, the stories, the message board. If you are a Buckeye fan, it's got everything you need. And Tom, it's as we've been saying, it's a one-stop shop.
It is truly a one-stop shop. The roster of talent that we've got is just ludicrous. It's just completely crazy. And when you have 4 recruiting writers who are all incredible recruiting writers, turns out they churn out a good bit of content. Like I keep getting emailed photos to resize and watermark, and it's like, wait, how did you guys get out to see this another guy? Like it's like they've already seen everyone in Ohio, and we've been open a week. I don't know how this is possible, but yeah, it has been awesome, and I mean it's been open not even 48 hours as we're recording this. The community is growing like. I think beyond our expectations. It's growing incredibly fast, and yeah, I went away from my phone. I left my phone somewhere for like an hour, and it came back, and there was some new thread that I had like 135 posts on. It was like, well, how? where are all you people coming from? But it's been awesome, and I would definitely encourage you to go check it out, and also you can. Just if you go to buckeyescoop.com, there's a bunch of free content there as well that you can kind of sample and get a sense. But yeah, there's far more stuff behind the wall if you are interested in joining.
One of the neat things is somebody mentioned it in the message board about, hey, I'd like to see some wrestling recruiting stuff. And 6 hours later, Mick Walker had reached out to the number 1 Ohio State commit in I think the 2022 class, and we had a piece posted, an interview with him the next day. So it is, come tell us what you want. Come tell us, give your critiques, give us your thoughts, because, we're here to build the best community in the Ohio State sphere. And I think we're on our way. And just simple stuff like that. Hey, I'd like to see some wrestling recruiting. There is a sizable wrestling contingent of Ohio State wrestling fans out there. And so we're planning to help you guys out. We've got a basketball recruiting piece with Malachi Branham, one of the top players in the upcoming class. Mick went and talked to him. So there is a constant stream of stuff. If you are into recruiting, that's the place to be. If you're looking for an Ohio State community, here we are. And, Tom and I will be doing football and basketball and all of the other stuff that you would like to see. So come on, check us out, and we'll talk to you later. Oh, hey, Tom, who's going to be on your show? Who's going to be on the Morning Scoop on Monday?
I'm trying to read my notes. It's a
very special guest?
Tony Gerdeman. I'm not sure who that is, but he's going to be on the show talking about the fact that Ohio State football players are going to be back Monday. Back in the Woody and starting to work out again, and signs of progress. So whoever this Tony Gerdeman guy is, I'm looking forward to doing a podcast with him because I'm kind of tired of doing one with you.
When I say a very special guest, you should have been like, no, he canceled. We had to get you.
I'm going to have you write my material from now on.
You didn't get my text. All right. So that'll do it. Thank you all for listening. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you later.
motel key. I wish it never meant nothing to me. Say you will, now say you will. Oh yeah. Say you will, now say you will. If you tell me that tomorrow's alright, we could steal a car and leave tonight. Midnight, porch light. I had to see you 'cause I know things just haven't been right. This feeling's getting stronger. I can't take it any longer. Say you will, now say you will. Oh yeah. Say you will, now say you will. If you tell me that tomorrow's alright, we can steal a car and leave tonight. Well, I came in for a goodbye kiss, but I could never have imagined this. Say you will, now say you will. Oh yeah. Say you will, now say you will. Say you will, now say you will. If you tell me that tomorrow's all